Hello, class. Okay, so I'm experimenting with something. So I'm coming at you by video because we don't see each other for 2 week stretches at a time. And although I can't hear and interact with you, I thought at least I could record a video and help you better understand and contextualize some of the information that you're getting on your Blackboard week. So I'm going to take the next few minutes just to kind of run down what I hope for you to learn. Hope that you would have learned this past week on your Blackboard week, so that between now and the next time we see each other, you'll be prepared to engage in the sort of activities that I hope for us to do when we get together again next Tuesday or Thursday. So here we go. Let me run down a few things. So just to give you a refresher on what we've done in the course thus far, there's a few things that you should have already learned up to this point. So the first part of the course is focused on families. We'll get to the group work on the latter half. Thus far in our work around families and what clinical therapeutic work looks like with families, we've talked about a few different things. So thinking about the generalist intervention model, right, and the different phases of treatment, we've already hit on a few phases already. So first we talked about values and ethics. That's not a phase necessarily of the GIM model, but it's something that's a starting place for social workers, right? You have to be practicing in a way that is consistent with our social work values and that is legal and ethical, right? So that you don't end up in trouble, okay? So the first thing that we talked about were some special considerations when you're working with families, legal and ethical considerations when you're working with families. Right after that, we moved into, what the working phases are with families. So phase one is engagement. Yes, engagement. So engagement and assessment and planning were kind of one clump. We took those three different phases and clumped them together so that the first thing that we should be thinking about as we're working with families is how to engage them, thinking about the family as your client, right? So remembering back to my illustration on, you have this person, but mom maybe is one arm, dad is maybe the head, brother is another arm, right? All these body parts represent the different members of the family, but the client is your family, right? The family unit is the client. Different from working with an individual with collateral support that are family members, right? Many of you do that work currently, where you work one-on-one with an individual, that's your patient, that's your client, and you use the family members just to help support that client. That is different from family work, right? So as you transition out of this program and become actual MSW professionals, you may end up in a work context that allows you to do family treatment, family therapy, and so the client is your family. The entire family is the client. So we went over that. So the engagement phase has a lot to do with your interview skills, all of that interpersonal stuff that you learned last semester and even first year on how it is you talk to someone. We never leave behind our motivational interviewing skills, that you're not interrogating people, you're listening reflectively, asking open-ended questions. So all of those things still remain in this work. What gets a little different and what some students struggled with has to do with the assessment phase of what we do in family work, right? So in assessment, again, your family is the client, but you're assessing them using some different skills, different concepts than you would have if you're working with an individual. So last week when we were together, we spent the entire session making sure that everybody was real clear on some concepts that you need to know when you're assessing families. Concepts like triangulation. Pop quiz, what's that mean? If you don't know, go back and make sure you're clear, right? Concepts like coalitions, thinking about the family life cycle, being similar to how we think of an individual and how they go through different life cycle stages, right? You go from infancy to childhood, to adolescence, young adulthood. The family also goes through its own life cycle. What does that look like? And when you're assessing this family that's sitting in front of you, what stage of the life cycle are they in, right? So there's a lot of key terms that we went over. This helps you to assess the family that's sitting in front of you. You cannot start treatment, working with them, talking about all these fancy interventions until you've accomplished assessment successfully. And that's for the same exact reasons that we do that with individual. There's a reason why the GIM model goes in a certain sequence, right? You have to engage before you can assess. If you haven't engaged well, they're not going to tell you anything. You're not going to be able to get your assessment information. If you haven't assessed well, you cannot come up with a plan on how you're going to help or intervene with this family, right? So it has to go in a sequence like that. So all of what we talked about, the case conceptualization that you guys were working on over the last 2-3 weeks now, is all about assessment and planning. So at this point, you should have completed the case conceptualization, which means that you've assessed the family vignette that you had in front of you, and that you also then went the next step in planning. And that comes by in the way of your treatment plan, right? So coming up, helping the client family to come up with goals, objectives for what they want to accomplish. You should be done with that now. Now we're moving on. We're moving right on, right? Okay, so assessment and planning, that has happened already. Family systems theory was one of the big ones that you need to know and pay attention to. That's where a lot of those terms come from that we worked on last week. So the terms like enmeshment and disengagement, triangulation, all of those come from family systems theory. You need to be familiar with that. There are also several other theories that we didn't have a chance to cover in person. And those materials are on Blackboard. So I expect that you will make time in your schedule to go back into that week 4 folder on Blackboard and take a look at the 2 readings that I pointed to you so that you can familiarize yourself with the theoretical foundation to some of the family work that we're going to be talking about for the rest of this first part of the class. The assessment interview skills that you should be familiar with, the sorts of questions you should be asking a family, the kind of information you want to know from a family, that came from the Van Hook book, so that orange and green textbook. And I don't remember what page it was, but that figure 4 that you all worked on for the case conceptualization, those 10 points were the things that you want to be thinking about, asking your client family. That again plays into your assessment. You cannot develop a treatment plan or figure out what fancy interventions you want to do with this family until you have properly assessed them. So this past week, another thing that you all had the opportunity to engage in was this domestic violence assessment training, okay? So you should have completed it by now. And so I just want to take a moment just to point out a few things that I noticed as I took it as well, and some things that I want you to be thinking about. So if you didn't realize, the training was put on by a government agency out of Canada, okay? So the reason why I assigned you this training is because I felt like it was pretty comprehensive. It was very interesting to me. It gave some very basic pointers on some things to be aware of, some things to look at, and it wasn't even really at a clinical level. If you paid attention, you could see that they really designed this training for just kind of your average, employee, supervisor, worker, human services professional, not necessarily even a clinician. And I couldn't find a training that I thought was as good or as well put together that actually came from the States, came from the United States, right? So I assigned you this one from Canada, but some things that I want you to be thinking about. One, there were lots of policy mentioned in that training, right? So Canada's kind of up to something. Like they are ahead of the curve in some ways. And they mentioned several policies on who is considered a mandated reporter when it comes to domestic violence. They talked a lot about just what happens in employment settings, right? What your responsibilities are as an employer, as an employee, to help recognize and address domestic violence. I couldn't find anything similar to that comes out of the United States. So let's think about, I just want you to think about, what are our current policies, laws, procedures here in this country that give us guidance as to what to do around domestic violence assessment, prevention, and intervention. Okay, one thing that I want you to do this week, between now and the next time we see each other, I want you to, in your field placement, ask your supervisor, what are our explicit policies around domestic violence, right? So if you have a family that comes into your agency, or even an individual really that comes into your agency for whatever services and treatment that's offered, and it becomes clear that there's an issue around domestic violence, what do you do? Right? What are the agency's policies that guide how it is that you and other workers respond to issues of domestic violence? I want you to find that out. And when we get back together, I'm going to ask you all if you found out what those policies are. I was so curious, especially after taking this Canada-based training, and I was like, dang, they got, some serious laws around domestic violence. What is the deal in our country? Even as a licensed clinician, I didn't even know, right? So I started doing a little investigation myself, and there really wasn't much that I could find, right? There are a couple of things that I noticed. One, which is posted on Blackboard, are some guidelines to those that work in medical settings. So those that work in medical settings, health clinics, hospitals, are actually healthcare providers, do have a mandate to assess for, report domestic violence, right? So if a woman comes into the ER or into her primary care doctor's office with signs of like physical violence as a result of domestic or intimate partner violence, that medical professional has to do something about that, right? Although that doesn't really apply apparently to mental health professionals, okay? So this is just something that I didn't get a lot of background on why Canada did what they did as far as creating these laws and these regulations to make sure domestic violence is assessed for and intervene on, but we kind of don't have that. So I want you to go into your placement agency. I want you to find out what are your requirements. Is there somebody that you report domestic violence to, right? We know we're mandated reporters when it comes to child abuse, and we know we're mandated reporters when it comes to elder abuse, but what about domestic violence? What's the deal on that? Okay, because as you work with families, these sorts of issues will come up, right? And I do want you to pay attention to, in the training, the different risk factors that they point out. These are just things, again, that go into assessment. That doesn't necessarily mean every woman or every person that comes into your office that kind of fits this criteria, like, oh, you're getting beat down at night, right? Like that's not what it means. But again, this is just more stuff that you're just going to have in your brain that you're using to assess the family that is sitting in front of you, right? And some of the things that you need to start assessing for are there issues around domestic violence in this family unit. That does, one thing that we are clear on, and I want you to also confirm this in your field placement when you meet with your supervisor, is when you are assessing for domestic violence between a couple that has children, how is that then different? How's that different, right? What are you required to do if there appears to be or there is alleged domestic violence happening between a couple that has minor children? I want you to find that out. I want you to ask, and then we'll talk about it when we get in class. So all of that is assessment. All that is assessment. The last thing that you should have already done is the treatment plan. So with your Vignette family, the Rodriguez family, the Stern, the Lowe family, whichever one you picked, what then kind of treatment plan can you establish with them? Now, of course, you got to be creative because you don't have physical people sitting in front of you. But let me remind you this. I said it before. I'm going to say it again. That even when you have a live family in front of you, usually the family is so lost and in so much chaos and has so much going on, they're not going to be able to clearly articulate their goals and objectives to you in a way that you think that they would. Right? So even when you're sitting with a live family, you need to have enough knowledge and clinical skill to be able to help guide them towards goals and objectives that feel right for them. They will still be looking for you to coach them, to lead them in a direction that will allow them to be successful. They will likely not already come into your office knowing what their goals and objectives are. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't even be there, okay? So it's good practice for you to try to do these things with a fictional client family that's on a piece of paper. Because if you're struggling to think about like, well, what would a good goal be? You know, how would I ask them this? What options do they have? You're going to struggle when it's a live person also. And that live person is going to be staring you in the face just like this, waiting for you to help them come up with something. So I'd rather you get the practice with some fake people on paper than wait until you have live people in your office and you're sitting there scratching your head because you don't even know what some options are for them, right? So this exercise gives you the ability to start to think through what could be some good goals for the family given the information that I have, right? And then when you're face to face with someone, you would just go through this process of asking them questions and perhaps giving them suggestions with permission, right, to help them be able to identify goals that really will work for them, goals and objectives. So that's where we are so far. That's where we are so far. I just wanted to recap, help you understand what you should have learned up to this point. The thing that I want you to do this week is go into your field placement. I want you, when you meet with your supervisor, who you should be meeting with weekly, when you meet with your supervisor, one of the things that I want you to have on your paper that you come into supervision prepared with your notes, the things that you want to address with your supervisor. One of the things I want you to ask is about the policies around domestic violence. And when you're working with a client or a family, especially if they do direct practice clinical work, do you report that to someone? What happens when it's revealed that your client is experiencing some form of domestic violence or intimate partner violence? I want you to find out what the policies are, what the procedures are. If there's anything that you are mandated to report, I want you to know that, and then we'll have some conversation on that when we come back together next week in our in-person class. Okay, so this week we are in week 5. This is your Blackboard week. When we come together next, we'll be in week 6 already. So I want to take just a moment. Last thing I want to talk about is what you need to prepare for going into week 6. So week 6, we'll transition officially into the intervention phase, right? So we've done engagement, assessment, planning. Now we're moving into intervention. There are many, many, many family therapy interventions, right? There are many. One of the handouts that I posted on Blackboard in that week 4 folder is pretty much a cheat sheet of some of the major family therapies. There's probably 10 of them at least on there, right? In the context of this class, we will not go through all 10, right? We won't go through 5 just because we don't have time. So the one therapy that we will focus on and that you will learn in this class is narrative family therapy. That's the only family therapy intervention that we're going to go through in this course. Don't fret. Because remember, in the very beginning of class, the first time we met, I tried at least to help you understand what the purpose of this course is, what the expectations are for you as you enter the world as an MSW. This is a career-long decision you've made, right? That will extend far beyond the 2 years that you're in this program. It's just not reasonable or realistic that you will come out of a 2-year program knowing all that there is to know about every aspect of clinical work and psychotherapy. This is just the phase of your career that lays the foundation, right? We're getting that concrete slab laid, making sure that foundation is nice and sturdy, so then you on your own throughout your career can build on that foundation, right? And learn different therapeutic techniques and skills, okay? So the only one that we're going to focus on is narrative family therapy. There is a video and a training that are assigned for this class. I need you to watch the video before you come into class next week, so that we can have an opportunity. I will guide you through practicing the various skills that you should have learned from that video. You won't have to actually turn in the reflection paper, however, until the following week on your Blackboard week, the week of the 19th, 21st. Okay? So I just want to be clear about that. So what you're going to want to do between now and when we see each other is watch the video and take detailed notes, right? Take detailed notes as you're watching it. Type your notes, write it out, whatever works best for you, so that it will be easier for you to write your paper. And I need you to be really clear on what it is, on what the various skills are, so that when we get in class together, we're practicing, we're getting to work, right? So that nearly the whole time that we're together next week should be doing the work. I want you to feel it. I want you to like get comfortable with it. I want you to be able to sit in it, right? What should you look like as you're doing this work with families, right? How should it feel? What should it sound like? So we're going to be working in some role play situations, getting in some groups. I'll try as much as I can to demo some of the skills, but we're going to spend our time together working through it. I want to see it. I want to see you with my own eyes and know that you can do some things. Okay, so that means that you have to come in prepared and having already read through the manual and watched the video before we get together next week. I think that might be it. So thank you for your time and attention. This was my first experiment. I don't know if I'll continue to do this. We'll see how it works, right? If I need to do these little like video recaps. And have an awesome and fantastic week. And I will see you when we meet on either the 12th or the 14th. All right, take care.